Well, good morning, everyone. I am so glad that you guys are with us today. I want to start by addressing everyone who is hanging out in our chapel space today. So glad that you guys are hanging out with us from that space. I know you're having a great time with Mike, with Matt, and the rest of the team over there. For all of you who are watching online, we want to welcome you as well. Today, we are kicking off a brand new series, and the title of that series is called Unfinished Business. Now, I don't know what you think of when you hear those words, but my mind almost always immediately goes to things that I have heard a lot of professional athletes say over the course of their career. I could give you many different examples, but I'll highlight just a couple of times where I have heard professional athletes use this phrase to describe the way they feel about the work they do, right? Let's start with one that you're probably all familiar with. There's a guy named Tom Brady. A few years ago, he retired, and then he decided that he was going to unretire, okay? When he decided to unretire, he put out a tweet in which he said this: "These past 2 months, I've realized my place is still on the field and not in the stands. That time will come, but it's not now. I love my teammates and I love my supportive family. They make it all possible. I'm coming back for my 23rd season in Tampa." And then he ended his tweet with these two words: unfinished business. Tom Brady, the GOAT, he came out of retirement because he felt like he had unfinished business left to do. And he is not the only one who uses this phrase to describe the work that he wants to do. LeBron James once used this phrase to describe the work that he wanted to do. When we lived in Canton, Ohio about 7 years ago, I would take my son to Cavs games every now and then. The Cavs were terrible, and so it was easy to get tickets. But then LeBron James decided he was going to come back to Cleveland, Ohio. And my son said to me, he said, "Dad, we got to get season tickets." And I said, "Son, we're never going to see a game again, okay? Like the cost of tickets just went through the roof because LeBron is coming back to his homeland," right? Now, the reason that LeBron wanted to come back to Cleveland is because he was born and raised in Akron, Ohio, about 45 minutes from Cleveland, and LeBron always wanted to be the guy who could bring a championship back to the people of Northeast Ohio. For over 50 years, no professional sports team had won a championship in Northeast Ohio, okay? The Indians hadn't done it, the Cavs hadn't done it, and everybody knows the Browns haven't done it, okay? Like it just hasn't happened. But people in Northeast Ohio really did believe that if anyone can do it, the chosen one could do it. LeBron James could do it. And so when LeBron announced that he was coming back to Cleveland, he said this. He said, "I'm a guy who believes in unfinished business." In each and every case, athletes who use this phrase, they're all saying the same thing. I have important work left to do, and I won't be able to live with myself if I don't do it. Now, these guys, they all have plenty of money. They never need to work again a day in their life. They could live anywhere they wanted to live. They could do basically anything that they wanted to do. But these guys are saying, I have a purpose. And my purpose is far greater than just living out a life of pleasure. Mosaic, I need you to understand that God has given us a purpose. And the purpose that He has given to this church is far greater than the life of pleasure that we're all living. Now, don't misunderstand me. We are going to have a lot of fun in our lives in the years ahead, but it's also time for this church to recognize that we have unfinished business to do all along the Mississippi Gulf Coast. The truth is, we need a campus in Harrison County. When we look at people who are coming here every weekend, we can look at families and where they live based on when they check their kids into Mo Kids. We can look at the families who are coming based on people who give and where they live. We can look at people who serve and they check in to serve, and so we know where they live. And what we know from the people who are giving, checking kids in, or serving is that 250 families are driving from Harrison County to Ocean Springs to attend church every single week. In addition to the 250 families that are driving from Harrison County past all kinds of churches on their way to this church, we also know that there are tens of thousands of people who live in Harrison County and they don't go to church anywhere. So why in the world would they go to a church all the way over in Ocean Springs? Guys, we have unfinished business left to do. The truth of the matter is, Harrison County doesn't just need another church. Harrison County needs a group of people who are Jesus-loving, Bible-teaching people that don't want something from their community, but they're there to do something for their community. And I'm telling you that Harrison County doesn't just need a group of people like that. Van Cleve needs a group of people like that. Pascagoula needs a group of people like that. Long Beach needs a group of people like that. Pass Christian needs a group of people like that. We need people like that all along the Mississippi Gulf Coast. It's been said by many different people, many different times, that a world at its worst needs a church at its best. The world that we are living in today needs strong churches. But strong churches, they are few and far between. I was speaking with a man right before this service who told me the church that he was going to was closing their doors in about 4 or 5 weeks. Did you know that every year in America, there are between 4,500 and 5,000 churches that are closing their doors every single year? Did you know that the average attendance in churches over the last 20 years has dropped from 137 people a week down to only 65 people a week? I want that to sink in. That all these churches that you drive past and you think, man, the church is alive and well. The average number of people walking through their doors every weekend is now only 65 people. Today, we know statistically that 80% of churches in America are now either plateaued or they are declining. And so when we look at the American church, we need to be clear about the state of the American church. The American church is weak. It is anemic, and in many cases, it is dying and they are closing their doors. And so this is what the experts are saying. The fact remains that if your church is growing, you need to launch a new campus. 94% of churches are now losing ground against the population growth within their communities. If your church is growing faster than the community you're currently in, we need your church to multiply what is happening there. The kingdom needs your church to launch its next campus. You'll end up facing the fact that things won't be perfect, but you'll need to launch anyway. There will be things that you'll need to work on even as you multiply. It will feel like building the plane while you're trying to fly it. It will require a lot from you and your leaders, but it's worth it. Seeing new people connect with the eternal message of Christ in a new campus is exciting and invigorating in equal measure. Guys, for whatever reason, God is blessing and God is using Mosaic Church. This church isn't dying. This church is rapidly growing. And because of that, we have a responsibility to take what is happening here and to multiply it all along the Gulf Coast so that other communities can experience what you're experiencing each and every weekend. And so today, I want to start a brand new series and a brand new study in the book of Nehemiah. If you're not familiar with this Old Testament book, this book is all about a man who realized that there was unfinished business left to do. Now, these stories that I told you earlier, Stories about Tom Brady and LeBron James, as important as those guys were, the unfinished business that they had to do, it pales in comparison to the significance of the unfinished business that Nehemiah had to do. So I want to start our study of Nehemiah by reading to you from chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. This is what we read. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev in the 20th year. While I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Now, in order for you to understand these verses, and truthfully, in order for you to understand the entire book of Nehemiah, you first have to be able to understand the exile. For years and years, the people of God had enjoyed the blessings of God. God had led them out of a land of slavery in a place called Egypt, and He told His people, I'm going to give you a land that is full of large, flourishing cities that you did not build. I'm going to give you a land that has all kinds of vineyards and olive groves that you did not have to plant. You are going to live in the land. You're going to enjoy peace in the land, and you are going to prosper in the land. It is going to be amazing. But in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 19, God said, if you ever forget the Lord your God and follow other gods and worship and bow down to them, I testify against you today that you will surely be destroyed. And sure enough, you can go read the story. That is exactly what happened. These people, they went into the land and they enjoyed the land and they enjoyed all the blessings that God had given them. But over time, they started to forget about God. Over time, they started to turn their back on God. Over time, they started to take it all for granted. They believed that this way of life was just a normal life. They didn't know that this way of life was a blessed life. They just thought, we live in a great nation. That they didn't realize, no, that this is a blessed nation. That they didn't see the correlation between the life they enjoyed and the God that they worshiped. They assumed that worshiping God didn't even matter anymore. And we all know what happens when people start to assume things. As these people started to turn away from God, as these people started to turn their back on God, God started to remove His hand of protection and He started to remove His hand of blessing on them. Eventually, their kingdom was invaded by another kingdom. Their homes were completely destroyed. The walls of their city were torn to the ground. Their gates were burned with fire, and their sanctuary was completely demolished. That is going to happen in America one day because Americans don't understand that this life of peace and this life of prosperity, it's not normal life, it's a blessed life. Look around at the rest of the world. It's not normal for people to live the way we get to live. The reason we enjoy so much peace, the reason we enjoy so much prosperity is because for over 200 years, this nation has worshiped the same God that they worshiped. We worshiped God for over 200 years, and we have been blessed by God just like they were. But we need to understand that when these people stopped worshiping God and when they turned their back on God, their cities were ruined. And these people were forced into exile. They literally had to leave their homes in order to find a new and better place to live. And so let me ask you, does that sound familiar to you? It should, because that is happening in cities all over America right now. People are doing everything they can to get out of LA and San Fran. People are doing everything they can to get out of Philly and Portland. People are doing everything they can to get out of Seattle and Detroit and New York. Why? Because these godless cities are some of the most broken cities that you have ever seen in the world. Crime is on the rise, so much so that there is now a Target store in San Francisco that has put every single item in their store behind glass. If you want a stick of deodorant or a tube of toothpaste, someone has to come and unlock the glass so that you can get your product before you leave the store. You can look at news headlines almost any week and you will discover that businesses and box stores are pulling out of the cities that I mentioned in droves. Parks are not full of playgrounds and children. They're full of prostitutes and people who are dealing drugs. It's in every headline. It's on every news station that you watch. Even country musicians like Eric Church can see what's happening. Just 2 years ago, he put out a song called Put That in Your Country Song. Anybody ever heard this song? Let me see your hands. A few of you have heard this song. For those of you who haven't, this is what he said in the song. He said, "Take me on up to Detroit City. Jails are full, the factory's empty. Mama's crying, young boys dying under that red, white, and blue still flying. Drop me off in Baltimore where every other window's got a plywood board, where dreams become drugs and guns. The only way out is to shoot or run." These cities are broken because the people in these cities have turned their backs on God. It was true in Nehemiah's day, and it is certainly true in our day. Now, I know that it's easy for those of us on the Mississippi Gulf Coast to believe that that's what happens in other cities, but it's not happening in our city. That's a really naive thought to hold on to. That's what I would call false hope. The stuff that is happening in other parts of the world, it is coming into our community faster than most of us realize. There are parts of Division Street in Biloxi that you do not want to be on after dark. There are neighborhoods around the Air Force Base that are not safe for you and your kids to walk. There are places in Moss Point and Pascagoula, and there are times when you do not want to be in downtown Ocean Springs after dark. Just 2 nights ago, on Friday night, a man walked into Scratch Kitchen, pulled out a gun, allegedly shot a bunch of people, one of which died. Right here in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. In so many ways, our world is broken and it's becoming just like the world that Nehemiah was hearing about. But there is one significant difference between what was happening then and what is happening now. Nehemiah was broken over it. But American Christians appear to be numb to it. When we look back in verse 4, we're told that when Nehemiah heard about these things that were happening in Jerusalem, he sat down and the dude wept. And he didn't just weep. He didn't just weep for a few minutes or maybe even a few hours. The text says that he was worked up over it for days on end. When he heard about the city that was in disgrace and when he heard about the people of God who were in great trouble, he mourned and he fasted and he prayed. You don't see that in American Christians. See a lot of American Christians who are angry about it. See a lot of American Christians who were apathetic about it or numb to it, but you don't see a lot of Christians who see what's happening in their country and who get down on their knees and start fasting and praying about it. And yet, this is where we have to start, because God is the only one who can change the human heart. If you think some political leader is going to get into office and his policies are going to fix things, you're wrong. If you think that sending police into the community is going to fix all these problems, you're wrong. If you think education is going to solve it, or if you think throwing money at it is going to solve it, you're wrong. There's only one thing on this sorry planet that can fix this broken world, and it's the power and the love of Jesus Christ. Nehemiah understood that God is the only one who can change the human mind, and He's the only one who can change the human heart. And so he got down on his knees and he started fasting and he started praying about the city that was broken. Not us. Thursday was the National Day of Prayer. One day a year, this country is supposed to make prayer a priority. And so let me ask specifically, those of you who are followers of Jesus, was prayer your number one priority on Thursday? Was it a priority at all on Thursday? Most Christians didn't even know that it was the National Day of Prayer, but because we're just cruising through life chasing after the things of this world, and yet Nehemiah was able to look at it, and Nehemiah was able to go, man, there's only one thing that is going to change the brokenness in our world. And yet so many Christians are just numb to what's happening in our world. We see the brokenness in our world, but we're not broken over the brokenness in our world. The things that are breaking God's heart, not even affecting our heart. I mean, if Nehemiah could hop in the car and ride around Harrison County, what do you think would break his heart that really doesn't even faze our heart? The fact that we've got a huge prison that is completely full. You think he would drive by the establishment where men pay women to take off their clothes while they sit there and watch, and he wouldn't be bothered by it? But we're just numb to it? You think he would be broken over the bars that are full and the adult bookstores that are out there? I'm telling you, Nehemiah would have been broken over the things that we have just grown to accept over the course of time. And yet what's really impressive about Nehemiah is that Nehemiah didn't even see it. All Nehemiah did is he heard about it. He heard it from the citadel in Susa. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. A citadel is a fortified place. He's hearing about Jerusalem, which was a broken down place. He was hanging in the citadel. He was cupbearer to the king. As cupbearer to the king, he would have always lived his life in the comforts of the palace. But when he heard that the people of God were in great trouble, when he heard that the city of God was in great disgrace, he left his life of pleasure and he pursued his God-given purpose. And this is what I admire most about Nehemiah. He's not just broken over it. He's going to do something about it. Mosaic, we have to do something about it. We can't expect people who are not Christians to just act like those of us who are Christians. We can't expect them to live and to abide by the commands of God when they don't even know that there is a God. We can't just settle for enjoying a life of pleasure. We have to be able to engage with the great purpose that God has given us. We can't just sit back and enjoy all the blessings of God. We have to understand that we have been blessed in order to be a blessing to the world around us. Nehemiah gets that, and so Nehemiah starts praying and fasting, and when he does, he talks to God about several different things. He starts by acknowledging the goodness of God and the sinfulness of man. Now, this is so important. A lot of you hear that and you think, okay, big deal, move on to the next point. Let me tell you something. Nehemiah's worldview was radically different than our worldview. Two of the most common questions that I get from people in our world is this: why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? And how can a good God allow people to go to hell? Now, I want you to look at those two questions, and I want you to think about this. Those two questions both suggest that God is bad and man is good. You look at it. Why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? That question suggests that God is in the wrong and that people are good and that God needs to get his junk together. Second question, how can a good God allow people to go to hell? Like, what's wrong with God that he would send good people to a place that they don't deserve to be? Those two questions both suggest that God is bad and that man is the one who is good. But in Nehemiah's prayer, he declared the exact opposite to be true. Throughout his prayer, he makes it clear that man is not the solution, man is the problem. He makes it clear that God is good and that man is bad. This is a major paradigm shift that is necessary in order to see the community come back to God. In verse 5, he starts his prayer with these words. He says, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments. Nehemiah is not saying that God is the problem. He sees God as the solution to the problem. He understands that by its very definition, God has to be good. So Nehemiah declares that God is both great and awesome. He acknowledges that God is faithful and that man is the one who is unfaithful. In fact, he expounds on this very idea and he takes ownership for what has happened to God's city and for what has happened to God's people. He basically says, God, the reason that we are in this mess is because we, bad people, have sinned against you, a good God. Nehemiah understands that yes, sin affects our lives. We all know that. Yes, sin has an effect on our family. We all know that. But Nehemiah sees that sin has an effect on communities and sin has an effect on entire countries. And so this is what he said in verses 6 and 7. He said, I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws that you gave your servant Moses. In America, we need to correct this very faulty way of thinking that we have. Our world is not jacked up because God is bad. Our world is jacked up because man is bad. Bad men do bad things all the time. And yet I understand that there are a lot of people who struggle with that age-old question, why do bad things happen to good people? I need you to place blame where blame is really due. It's not God's fault. It's a bad man's fault. I'll prove it to you. How many of you have seen these commercials that are on TV all the time about lawsuits that you can be a part of if you were in certain places or if you use certain products? Most of us, if we watch TV, we've seen these types of commercials, right? If you've ever used Roundup, there's a $10 billion lawsuit right now where they're paying money out to their victims. You were stationed at Camp Lejeune. Yes, we knew that the water was toxic, but we didn't do anything about it because either we were too lazy or we were too greedy. We sold people cigarettes, we knew what was in them, and we just didn't care. Those are just a few examples. I don't have time to talk to you about asbestos. I don't have time to talk to you about what the Corps of Engineers did with the Mississippi River when they made decisions that they knew would lead to flooding, that would drive fertilizers into our water, that would affect the water that we drink and eventually the fish that we eat. I don't have time to talk to you about the steroids that we're pumping into our animals and the chemicals that we're putting on our vegetables, all so that we can grow things faster, so that we can consume more, so that they can make more. I don't have time to tell you about all of that, but when you look at some of these examples, what you realize very quickly is that these people have been deemed by a court of law in this country as criminally negligible. Bad men did bad things because they were greedy. They cared more about the money in their pockets than they did about the lives of their customers. And so as a result, they are now legally responsible, and they are paying out tens of billions of dollars because they did bad things to good people. And yet, when a good person gets cancer and dies, we blame God for it. Because that's easy. I'm telling you, when people get to the other side, they will realize how good God is, and they will also realize how bad man was. But at that point, it will be too late. And that's why, America, we have to go through a paradigm shift right now. Because people are buying into a lie that is driving them away from God when the solution to the problems in our world is to come back to God. Nehemiah prayed, and Nehemiah recognized both the goodness of God as well as the sinfulness of man, even in his own family and, yes, even in his own life. But as he prays, he holds on to a promise that God gave his people. Look in verse 8. He said, I know that you told us, God, that if you are unfaithful, then I will scatter you among the nations. But you also said that if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. You see, Nehemiah is not just broken over what was happening in the city. He is going to lead a charge on a major project to rebuild and to restore that city. Now, know this. He's not just looking to build a wall, okay? Trump can build a wall, okay? Nehemiah is going after something way bigger than that. Nehemiah says, I don't care about a wall. I care ultimately about bringing people back to you. And so he's asking God to remember that promise, and he's asking God to give him success. Listen to verse 11. He says in his prayer, God, give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. I was cupbearer to the king. You see, at this point in his life, Nehemiah had been serving the king, but now he's going to ask a favor of the king. He's going to go to this king, and you're going to see it next week, and he's going to ask the king if he can go back to his homeland to take care of some unfinished business. You're going to see next week how God honored that prayer and God answered that prayer, and how God gave him the time that he needed and the resources that he needed to rebuild and to restore everything that sin had broken. This very broken city would soon look like a brand new city because of the work that Nehemiah and his friends were about to do. Nehemiah made a big ask of the king, and I am going to make a big ask of you. I'm asking you to get serious about the unfinished business on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Don't just come and consume. Let's get serious about contributing to the great work that God has given this church to do. I'm asking you to give. I'm asking you to serve. And if you live in Harrison County, then I'm asking you to go. Mosaic, I want you to know why we are here. This is our very mission statement. Our elders have voted on it, and this is our mission statement from this day forward. Mosaic Church exists to help broken people become brand new people by teaching them to follow Jesus. Now listen, Mosaic has always been about broken people. But from this day forward, we're not just celebrating brokenness. We're acknowledging that God wants to take what is broken and He wants to make it brand new again, but by teaching people how to follow Him and His ways through His Son, Jesus Christ. That this is what we are here to do. And if you come back in the weeks ahead, I'm going to show you how we plan to do it. I hope you'll join me each and every week of this series, because I believe that God is calling us to do something special in and for Harrison County. And I believe that God wants each and every one of you to be a part of it. Will you pray with me? As we bow our heads in prayer, I just want to start with people who aren't really even in a relationship with Jesus, not a follower of Jesus. Man, I hope that just today you start to see the heart behind Mosaic Church, and I pray that you see the heart of God. That God looks at a broken world and He wants to do something to help those in brokenness. That God's love for you is great, and God's love for the world is great, so much so that He sent His Son Jesus into the world to die for the sins of the world and to show us a better way to live. For those of us who are followers of Jesus, God, I pray that you would start to do in us exactly what you did in Nehemiah. God, my prayer for each and every person in this room and in the chapel and those who are watching online is that you would stir in us a sense of brokenness over the brokenness that we see in our world. That you would cause us to mourn and to grieve over what we see in our world. That we would not only feel grief over what is happening, but that we would feel driven to do something about it. God, I pray that you would make it really, really clear that the reason we are in the position that we're in is because we have turned our back on you. God, I pray that it would be clear to your people. I pray it would be clear to this country. What should we expect if we walk away from God and we try to take God out of every part of our lives except for the church? And so God, just please help us, awaken us so that we might see both what is happening in our country and why it is happening. But God, finally, I pray that you would stir in your people a willingness to do something about it. That we would be willing to, yes, enjoy the blessings of God, but that we would also understand that we have been blessed to be a blessing of others. Pray, God, that our focus would not be on a life of pleasure, but that we would be consumed by your purpose for your church. And I pray it all in Christ's name. Amen.